This is the history of the Ernest M. and Mabel P. Skinner family. Here's the story of Nephi Aaron Skinner. Chapter 6, pages 40 through 44. Avocation. Nephi's time for hobbies and avocations was limited. However, he became a very popular violin player and played for many dances, both square and round. The dances were generally held in Latter-day Saint meeting houses, where they moved the benches back and danced around the pot-bellied stove in the center. Kerosene and carbide lights were the first kind of lighting until electricity eventually came. The transition from square dances to the round dances was a hard one on the older folks. They thought round dancing was a sin. One of Nephi's popular square dance numbers was the Irish Washerwoman, and he called the dance routine at the same time he played the violin. Someone was generally playing the piano with him. He also played the accordion and the piano. Nephi's old violin was donated to the Daughters of the Utah Pioneers Museum at Montpelier, Idaho. Another pastime Nephi enjoyed was visiting. When he went to town, he always spent time visiting with friends and businessmen. They all respected his comments on the community and world events. It surprised many to know how well informed he was about current events. Many sought his counsel and advice on business, current events, and gospel subjects. He was well known for his knowledge and familiarity with the scriptures. He was continually being asked to speak in church meetings and at funerals. As time permitted, after the haying was over, Nephi took his family in the old car or buggy to visit the relatives, his brother Hiram in Providence, Utah, William Henry in Soda Springs, Idaho, Joseph Alma in Bedford, Wyoming, Etta Mae's brother Lester Morgan in Pocatello, Idaho, and her sister Fanny Budge in Paris, Idaho. The church was the community in many respects, but not all. Nephi was also involved in the church, but he was also involved with other aspects of the community. The Newnan School District No. 14 was organized the year Nephi's parents moved to the valley in 1875. The Skinners, his brothers, and Chugs are on record as officers. From June 1899 to 1902, Nephi served as chairman on the Board of Trustees. In 1908, he served as clerk of the board. In 1923 to 1927, Nephi served again as clerk of the board, and at other times he was either chairman of the board or a board member. He was always concerned about good schools and good teachers. He always did his part to see that such was the case. In 1929, he was instrumental in getting a new gymnasium added onto the old schoolhouse. At different times during his adult life, the county commissioners appointed Nephi roadmaster, the one to oversee the public roads in the valley. This was an assignment without pay. Nephi always did an excellent job in this capacity. It meant grading and leveling the dirt roads in the spring after the snow was gone and after heavy rains, seeing that proper bridges were installed and maintained where needed, and graveling of the roads where money would permit. Pay was granted for work done by those who were hired by Nephi. In the early years, however, work was donated. Nephi was greatly responsible for getting the road constructed through the Narrows out of Newnan Valley, located near the center of the valley. When the automobile came in style, better roads had to be provided and maintained. In the winter, the roads were closed for auto travel much of the time. Nephi, however, had foresight to build a V-shaped wooden snowplow that was pulled down the road by a 4-horse team, and it pushed the snow off to the sides. This was exciting at that time. Nephi was one of the original incorporators of the nonprofit Skinner Irrigation Company, which was organized on March 27, 1905. It consisted of 8,500 shares of capital stock. He owned 1,600 shares, which meant 1 hour of irrigation time from every stream out of Skinner Canyon for each 10 shares of stock. He was secretary of the first organization. A watermaster was elected by the shareholders. Each shareholder had 1 vote for each 10 shares of stock. The watermaster planned and scheduled when water would be taken. Nephi was often the referee in disputes and fights over whose water or turn it was, and he played the role of peacemaker. At different times, he served on various county committees, both political and civic. In 1936, Nephi spearheaded an organization of neighbors in Newnan that worked with a government program known as the Rural Electrification Administration, a former agency of the U.S. Department of Agriculture that administered loan programs for electrification and telephone service in rural areas. This program made it possible for electric power to be brought to Newnan Valley. Much of the work was donated by digging holes for the poles and other jobs that local people could perform to bring about this great convenience. Patience and persistence on Nephi's part was a big reason this was achieved. To have electricity in the homes and barns with the conveniences therewith was a great step forward for the citizens of Noonan Valley. Many times, Nephi gave hay and grain as well as labor to neighbors who were in need. This was never done without any thought of compensation. It was not uncommon for some neighbors during the winter months to cut the wire fences that separated the property from Nephi's and let their cattle into the haystacks for feed. He chased the cattle back, fixed the fence, only to have it repeated. These same neighbors served in various church capacities with Nephi at the time of their infringements. Nephi's travels were mostly in connection with some other objective than just traveling. The first of these of any significance was to traveling and touring during his mission and as he returned. He recorded in his missionary journal in some detail the touring of church history sites in and near Kansas City, Missouri, in the company of other missionaries. He had time in Chicago, Illinois to make a tour of significant sites in the large metropolitan area. At Buffalo, New York, he took a side tour of Niagara Falls and saw its majesty. In New York City, time was granted for sightseeing of various notable sites in the large city. Nephi's first experience on a ship was from New York along the coast to Boston. Here he was permitted another extensive tour of the area, especially those places connected with the Revolutionary War. The travel by ship to Liverpool, England was the most exciting and interesting. Nephi had no problem with being seasick. At various times in the mission field, he was permitted little side trips to important sites as well as family historical places, especially South Molton and Bristol, where his relatives lived and his parents were born. Prior to returning home, Nephi made a rather extensive tour of London and visited religious historical places as well as other places of important English history. A regular annual trip for Nephi was going east with the lambs. This meant driving the lambs to the Montpelier stockyards 15 miles from the farm and loading them on railroad sheep cars. When a train picked them up, Nephi rode in the caboose. The railroad cars in which the lambs were being transported were switched into a stockyard every 24 hours for the lambs to get water and feed. Nephi stopped with them and saw what sites there were at such places as Laramie, Wyoming, North Platte, Nebraska, and Valley, Nebraska, just a few miles outside of Omaha, where the lambs were marketed. While at Omaha, Nephi visited important church history places such as winter quarters at Florence and Council Bluffs, Iowa. As his sons became old enough, he took one of them with him on this trip. The trip home was by passenger train. The return ticket was included in the shipping agreement of the lambs with the railroad company. While on the annual trip to market with the lambs, it was not uncommon for Nephi to assign the lamb shipments to Denver, Colorado, and at another time to Chicago, Illinois, and another time to St. Louis, Missouri. The decision of where to go depended on the market conditions for lambs. On one of these trips, he took advantage of the opportunity to route his return by way of Joplin, Missouri, where he visited his son Carl and family, who were there on a mission. In the fall of 1936, Nephi took his son Earnest in the auto to Los Angeles, California, to visit Clausen and his family. He had Ernest's teeth fixed and got himself a new set of dentures. The trip included sightseeing of Hoover Dam near Las Vegas, Nevada, and many places of interest in the Los Angeles area. Many times, Nephi took his family on short trips not far from the ranch. Sometimes it was an overnight trip or a fishing trip to Star Valley, Wyoming, that included a visit to his brother Joseph Alma and family, who lived in Bedford, Wyoming. At other times, it might be celebrating getting the hay all put up, and he took his family to the Henry Stampede and Rodeo held north of Soda Springs near Henry's Lake. Another family trip was to Bear Lake to swim and have a picnic. Occasionally, Nephi took some of his family and visited with his sister, Emily Eugenia Winters, in Salt Lake City, Utah. Another trip was to Logan, Utah, to go to the temple and to visit his eldest brother Hiram, who lived in Providence, Utah. These were all enjoyable trips and educational for his family.